Hello and welcome to today's episode of Let's Talk Loyalty and Loyalty TV, featuring a platform which was described to me as one of the best kept secrets in the industry. Loyalty Methods is the firm behind such iconic programs as 7 Rewards, MGM Resorts and Western Union Rewards. And I think they have a very unique approach in a number of key areas that I think are incredibly important to those of you listening who run huge programs like these. The 2 areas I found most fascinating are their methodology and approach to de-risking a loyalty program that has decided to replace its underlying platform, as well as the way they think about their product roadmap. Joining me today to share these insights, as well as their background, methodology, and some key success stories, is Emil Sarkissian, CEO of Loyalty Methods. I hope you enjoy our conversation, and if you're listening today on our podcast channel, I want to encourage you to take the opportunity to also watch our conversation on video on our new channel, www.loyalty.tv. Thanks for watching. So, Emil Sarkissian, welcome to Let's Talk Loyalty and Loyalty TV.
Thanks, Paula. Great to be here. Appreciate it.
It's really wonderful to have you here. I feel like we need to credit our mutual friend, Phil Rubin, actually, for connecting us.
Yes, I would say so.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. Sometimes I feel it's a very small world in loyalty, and then I discover guys like you, and you're doing such incredible work, and we haven't had a conversation. So we're here to put that right. Lots to hear about. I know you're doing some incredible work. So first of all, I'm going to kick off with our usual opening question, Emil, which I know is quite a sensitive one for somebody who is working so extensively in the industry. But nonetheless, that's what makes it interesting for us. So first and foremost, Emil, tell us, what is your favorite loyalty program?
Oh dear. Yes, it is a loaded question. So before I answer it, I will just prefix this answer with just you have to keep in mind that, I actually exist in the loyalty world in 3 different roles. And one is the consumer, which just enjoys the loyalty program benefits. And one is the marketer, who kind of thinks about how to do this from the marketing side, from the brand side, and also the technologist who actually tries to bring it together technically. So when I look at a program, I sort of appreciate it in many different ways. And so, again, I generally have a lot more knowledge about the programs we're working with and how they're internally set up. So I would say that, I would reference one of our customers, and it's going to be the 7 Rewards. And the reason, I have lots of reasons to say that this is a really, really interesting program and very well done because, we've been on this digital, journey with them for a while now, for about 5 years or so. And, the amount of stuff that they've done is amazing. They are basically have created a rich experience for their customers. There's a lot of mechanics and a lot of tactics that they can utilize, like streaks, clubs. They're using a lot of, they have now the digital wallet. So they've made it frictionless. They've made it very easy for consumers to engage, and they've made it very, very interactive. So everything that you do on this program is sort of giving you feedback and sort of driving you to do more, and brings brand to your mindset and all that. And technically, they're also very, very proficient. We work with a very agile, very fast-paced team. And so I would mention also one other thing is the velocity of this program, how quickly it changes, and to react to market conditions and to exploit opportunities and to counter any trends. It's just amazing how fast it works. I mean, it changes literally almost daily, right? And they can roll out changes daily on our platform and make really fast adjustments across a very, very large number of stores. Something like 10,000 stores or so between the U.S. and Canada. Right. So again, an amazing at scale. Technology-wise, very, very tight. A large, huge volume, lots of velocity on the program.
Incredible.
Hard to do all these things at once. Yeah, definitely.
Yes, it's an exceptional example, Emil. So absolutely, thank you for raising it. We've had 7-Eleven once on the show before. We're actually due to have them back on again. But I do remember having a little bit of a glimpse into the genius of what you guys are doing together. I used to judge genuinely the International Loyalty Awards. And of course, you know, I'm bound by confidentiality, as are you, in terms of really some of the performance. But as a judge, I did get to see a little bit of the incredible deliverables and the returns on investment for the 7 Rewards program. So yes, we can only continue to wish them well. And when we get into some of your USPs, I guess, as a platform, I also remember you told me last time we met, you know, when you did take on that program, you actually did have to build it, you know, literally, I guess, in parallel with their previous program, completely alongside it. So we'll get into that story in a bit more detail. But yes, full congratulations to you guys for getting the 7 Rewards business, both in the US and I think internationally as well, Emil. Am I correct?
Yes, absolutely. Yes,
Yeah.
we have the US, Canada, and international across, you know, the world. So it is, it's getting
wonderful.
All of the different pieces.
So tell us on Earth, how did you get here? I mean, that has to be one of the, you know, programs that every tech platform wants to build and run. But take us back to the starting point, Emil. Where did you come from? I suppose both, you know, personally and professionally to get to where we are today.
Right. So yeah, it's a long story, but I'll try to keep it short. I was born in Bulgaria, and you know, I was always, you know, since I was 12, I was trying to write computer games and things, and so I was always in IT to begin with.
Okay.
And then fast forward, you know, to college, I went to the University of Teesside in England, in Middlesbrough, and did my information technology undergrad there. And then came to the U.S. Just around the Y2K, you know, and everything, and sort of, you know, ended up staying here.
Okay.
With and doing an MBA and so on. And so it's essentially my trip was sort of several countries to come here. But when I finally sort of started my career here, I was working in CRM at first at a large bank.
Yeah.
And I was, you know, essentially drawn to the idea of doing something interesting with not just CRM, but also combine CRM and marketing and sort of drive engagement, you know, in an interesting way. So when the opportunity for loyalty came around, and actually the platform we were working with at that time was Oracle Siebel, you know, rolled out loyalty. I saw the opportunity along with my business partner at the time to create this company to actually help companies build these programs. Now, in those days, and that was 2007, 6, 7. You know, loyalty was just really a thing that airlines did and hotels did. And it wasn't really big in retail or elsewhere, at least not as visible as it is now in so many industries. And so at that time, we started with Alaska Airlines as our first customer, and their mileage plan. And that was successful in 2008.
Okay.
And shortly after that, so we were basically a service company at the time, just doing the integration piece. And so we realized very quickly how difficult it is actually to make that kind of change in any company of any significant size.
Yeah.
Right. And so that you know, that service business was going on, and we were working with all these platforms that were somebody else's platforms, and cloud was just beginning. I mean, Amazon Web Services and those kinds of things were just kind of revving up around that time. And so a couple of years into it, and by the way, I should mention that we were based out of Seattle. So I knew some people here that were working in AWS, and we sort of started understanding that this was going to change things quite a bit, and that the platforms that were built, you know, before cloud were really not easy to put on cloud. We tried that, and you know, it worked up to a certain point, but we really thought that you know, if we wanted to make a truly engaging cloud-ready, sort of cloud-first solution, we'd have to start from scratch. And so that's what we did with our Reactor CX platform. And that was the, you know, the genesis of that, you know, is really to try to move the technology along with the available infrastructure that was beginning to be very prevalent at the time. So that's our kind of story. And again, 7-Eleven was an early adopter for Reactor CX, our platform, and I'm glad they were, because a lot of engagement with them in the beginning drove a lot of our thinking about what matters and how to scale, you know, early on, so that we can build this in from the start rather than, you know, have it as an afterthought or worry about it later when we bump into some huge customer. It was the biggest. We actually pretty much started with the biggest thing that was out there in retail, so which was very lucky, I think, but also very challenging. right? In a good way.
Well,
Yeah.
lucky and challenging, Emil. I think you're being very humble. In fairness, there was clearly something they saw that was unique. And as you said, I mean, I certainly know nothing about technology, as you know, but I'm interested in your approach and the sheer fact that a brand like 7-Eleven chose to partner with essentially probably a startup at the time, and I suppose build a partnership and a technology solution together that evolved at their incredibly fast-paced needs and based on a vision that you had. I mean, it's a remarkable story. So given that I don't understand technology, and we don't really talk about features on this show,
Yes.
I think pretty much
Yes.
everybody can guess that you do all the basics, earns and burns and whatever we need it to. But I think what impressed me in, I suppose on the business side as somebody who's run programs was two particular things. But the first one was this idea of how to de-risk what is a very complex implementation. And this is the story we alluded to in terms of 7-Eleven. They did already have a platform in place, but will you just talk us through how you decided to implement that, given that, obviously the business has to continue, loyalty program cannot stop and start. So how did you decide to de-risk it for them? And I know that's part of your framework and methodology now for the clients you work with.
This is a very good question, and I will start with the only way that we were able to. So of course, every startup or every sort of early product set has compelling features that look great, and it's like, hey, this would really be cool to have. But then, as you know, these large enterprises, you can't make a decision on something like that lightheartedly without thinking about, hey, is this company, have they seen scale? Will it work? So I think the big thing that we offered them that actually completely changed their thinking about that was that we were actually able to give them a plan and also supporting tool set that would allow us to run our system in parallel in the background without anyone else seeing it, and clone all their traffic, everything that they're doing, and sort of run it in the shadows, kind of, you know, and let them experience our system in parallel with real production traffic, with all the volume across all the stores, without actually having to switch to it unless they're absolutely ready and sure that this is great.
Yeah.
And that and that it's equivalent, that the balances are matching, that everything is working right. All the things that So essentially, the ability to stand up a parallel solution like that and to run head to head with the current system over a period of time, is allowing them to. So it's also sort of like try before you buy kind of deal, where you could walk away if you decided that, hey, this isn't working for us, or it's not scaling enough, or it's falling behind, or it's inaccurate, or any of those things, right? So giving that confidence and providing the methodology, and again, there's a tool set that goes with it, that allows this to happen. I think completely removed that risk mindset from their consideration, and said, look, if it works, we can run it for some time, weeks, months, whatever we need to, and whenever you're comfortable, you make that decision, and we make the switch. And as a matter of fact, I never forget that night when we did the switch, and it was really interesting, because it literally nobody saw anything happen really, because it has been running for so long. At the and it's funny, because after we did this, later customers like Western Union, when we switched, I think the US and Germany were their biggest markets, and when we switched them over, people actually, did we actually do the switch? Because we didn't see anything happen. Like, no, because it's so seamless. By the time we have tested everything and ran in parallel for so long, it is so seamless that it's a non-event. Like, the go live is not the usual, oh my gosh, will it work, won't it work? It's almost guaranteed that there's not going to be any impact at all. So we were very excited, because that was the first time we actually proven our thoughts and our tools that we built to do this, because we realized that no one will sign up for this big a change without risk controls of some sort.
Absolutely. And again, I know obviously, 7-Eleven were the ones that identified that they wanted this to happen, with full peace of mind, and give them the time, I suppose, I think what you explained to me is that anything that could have arisen in terms of always the inevitable minor bugs, that came up when it was running in parallel. So it was fixed in advance of go live. And as you said, going live is a non-event then, which I think is an incredible achievement.
Yeah, it's essentially transferring the risk from go live to
Yeah,
well before go live, before anyone sees anything. And there's still risk. I mean, we still saw problems, but we were
yeah,
able to fix them. And by the way, I should mention another thing is that as we go to run in parallel, what's interesting is that, and I've done this several times now, across different industries, I've never seen a program where people actually, and what the published rules say is actually exactly the same in production. In other words,
yeah,
our parallel run actually has two functions. One is de-risking, the other one is actually auditing what's going on in production. Because if we see any differences,
yeah,
sometimes they can be explained simply by what you think is happening in production is really not quite what's happening in production, right? So in
yeah,
your own system, right,
yeah,
in the original system. And so it has a lot of benefits that it brings out all the
yeah,
the nooks and crannies of a system that may have been running sometimes for decades, and being patched and so on, and people have left the company and
yeah,
nobody knows what happened.
yeah,
And suddenly there's stuff running in production on autopilot that everybody forgot about. So we end up seeing that because we're comparing
yeah,
two systems that we think one should be
yeah,
according to the current published rules, but what's in production sometimes
yeah,
is a little bit off, here and there. So
yeah.
again, great way to audit your current implementation and fix up any sort of things that have been struggling like
Yeah,
that.
yeah. I loved that insight, particularly Emil, because I think you're right. There is so much turnover, particularly in big
Mhm.
companies, and nobody has a full picture of exactly how the program is running because, as you said,
Mhm.
it's been built over time and things have been changed and fixed, and nobody remembers what happened years beforehand. So the fact that
Mhm.
somebody's long gone, but there's something they built that now you suddenly discover, as you said, in that preparation phase is quite, I suppose, hilarious, but again, only hilarious because I don't have to deal with it. So,
Well, I
wow.
mean, it's people are usually thankful, and we're
Yeah,
able to reconcile these pretty easily. But again, it just has that function, which is an added benefit to this whole thing. Is that
yeah.
it's more than just risk controls.
It's
Yeah,
amazing. Yeah, no, very reassuring. I know that's how I felt when you explained it. So thank you for explaining it so clearly again today. The second piece that you
of course.
explained to me, Emil, was just how you think about, I suppose, the future of developing a technology like loyalty methods. Again, none of us
Hmm.
can ever stand still. The industry's moving now at a phenomenal pace. And a lot of
Hmm.
RFPs, I suppose, would talk about the technology roadmap and,
Hmm.
exactly how do, platforms think about that. And again, I think you
Hmm.
have a very unique way of thinking about that, which again is clearly working super well. So just explain to us, my summary recollection is you described it as actually reality is the roadmap. And that to me, again, was a very unique perspective. It was brilliant. So tell us, how do you think about the feature set and
Right.
how you evolve it? Yeah.
Right, and again, that's a good way. It's in fact I have to credit Phil with that, but saying reality
Amazing.
is that roadmap.
Yeah.
But it is true. Go ahead, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, but essentially what is interesting about roadmaps is that this idea that we are I mean, yes, we do see a lot of industries, we do a lot of research and understand what's happening with these programs in order to implement them, right?
Mm.
And so we do know a lot about what's going on,
Yeah.
but to think that somebody can sit in an ivory tower and sort of invent a roadmap and say we're going to do this for the next 5 years or 2 years or even 1 year,
Yeah.
is a little bit it's risky from a business standpoint because we don't know if that's really what's going to be needed,
Yeah.
and it's sort of it's difficult to imagine the kinds of things that people would do with our platform
Mm.
and where they will fall short in some areas where they need help
Mm.
with features and general ideas that would be implemented. So what we think about when we think about roadmap is we base it almost, I would say, there's a weighting there, but we based it a lot of it on what's happening in reality in production today and what people are struggling with on a daily basis and
Yeah.
how their ideas about what they want to do are changing. And that's an interesting thing because as as Ford said once, if I asked people what they wanted, they would say a faster horse, not a
Yes.
car, because they couldn't imagine that, right? So the thing with the the thinking of our clients evolves once they get on our platform.
Yeah.
That's when they really start to think about things proactively. And again, it is the nature of this complex world that until you see something, you don't know what you actually need to do. You sort of have to have some physical experience with the product,
Yeah.
with the platform, with the loyalty space itself, and how it's changing.
Yeah.
So the ability to make these quick changes is really what we're trying to focus on, rather than sort of have these
Yeah.
grand ideas that they sort of invest massively and then sort of find out that the market's moved on and nobody cares, or there's a big other problem that has to be solved.
Yeah.
So I think reality, again, we are very much grounded in the field, trying to understand what people are really struggling with. Number one, if they're struggling with anything,
Yeah.
and secondly, is there something that they're realizing after using the platform and after rolling out a lot of promotions, that is suddenly a realization that we can leverage to build new features that, and of course, we take them and we generalize them and make them, a little bit more broad usually, to be able to capture all of the related use cases. But that's the majority of our roadmap revolves around making sure that we can respond quickly to the needs of like next month, or something like that, and not the needs of like 2 years down the road that we might think we know what they are, but a lot of times that's not. It's not very accurate, and there's a lot of risk in that decision to go that far, right? So.
Well, you know what I'm also hearing, Emil, coming through, which is just coming to mind as you're explaining it. I often hear brands really, when they're maybe dealing, with a particular platform, they sometimes feel that there's a very long time that they have to wait to get something that, as you've just described, they've realized they need to get that onto a development roadmap. But it sounds like you are doing that every single day, that it's actually... that is the overall approach. And I love that because, fundamentally, how else can I be sure that the problems that arise in my business today, which are going to arise, are going to be something that's taken on by a partner and solved, rather than, again, put onto a roadmap where, it might have to wait a very long time to come into production.
Right, absolutely. I think that's I think what you're saying here is yes, the time to market on these ideas and features cannot be like 6 months or a year, which is a lot of times what happens with platforms, is that they put it on a backlog and again, yes, there has to be a process, absolutely. But what we try to emphasize is the agility of it, and sort of talk about weeks versus 6 months or a year or something. And again, it gets tougher as you get more clients. I see that too, and as we have a broader we have different industries. So Western Union's financial, 7-Eleven's retail. We got BP, we've got Speedway, we've got MGM, gaming. It's just a lot of different pieces now to this puzzle. And so what our challenge is as a business is to allocate our resources, especially the ones that are building product out, in such a way that we shift the emphasis onto current understanding of the field and what that means in the next few weeks to even a quarter max. So I think that's kind of our thinking about that. It's to emphasize agility and try to use our resources to deliver that to the maximum we can.
Absolutely, right? And agility combined, I think, with quite a bit of speciality, if I'm not mistaken, as well. And the one that really impressed me, and I know we're going to have them on the show at some point soon, is MGM Resorts. And of course, gaming is a heavily regulated industry. And again, it was only when we met that I really started to understand that every time somebody uses the slot machine is a transaction that you've got to capture, you've got to recognize, track, and obviously reward. So anything that you can share in terms of the gaming industry, I feel that's a sector that it must be so sophisticated, so complex, and super exciting to work in.
It absolutely is. In fact, it's one of my favorite places to get personally involved, with things. There is a large, especially MGM owns, I would say about 60% of the Strip or so. It's a pretty amazing. It's a pretty good. It's huge, and it's so the amount of, as you said, regulation and complexity within the gaming business to begin with, which then combines with food and beverage and hotel, spa, and sort of all these other things that go with it. Different business lines essentially, and so you're mixing several lines of business. So I think what's interesting about that is it was able to leverage our ability to ingest activities that we call polymorphic, which really means can assume many shapes. So in other words, I can have a hotel transaction, and the next one could be a slot machine, the next one could be a table, the next one could be a restaurant bill. All these things come to us, and platforms, polymorphic activities are able to sort of shape these transactions in a way that the platform can, ingest them and sort of organize them without getting confused between the different lines of business,
Yeah.
and allowing some control over how this is done. So for the gaming side, you're right. One of the interesting things we noticed on the gaming side is how granular it is. As you said, some active player can go and do,
Yeah.
hundreds of transactions a day,
Yeah.
right? Which doesn't happen with 7-Eleven, which is quite frequent, but they don't go, to 7-Eleven 100 times a day.
Yeah.
It doesn't resemble any other thing that we've seen. And also the earn is very granular. Every single transaction gives you a little bit of currency, not a lot. And so when you try to do redemptions and things and try to, track all the behind the scenes, all the accounting, there's a lot of granularity to that, which is something that is very different from other industries. And so we found that, it was a good test for a platform in terms of granularity and ability to handle, a redemption that covers maybe hundreds of accruals, maybe even thousands in some cases, right? So that's kind of like one of the most interesting things about this world.
Indeed.
I would say.
Yeah, and of course you're predominantly there talking, I suppose, about the mass market in terms of what MGM Resorts is doing, but I guess the top tier as well would have its own, I'm sure, extraordinary insights, which again, we won't get into today, but I can just imagine again the scale of the big rollers, in terms of what they're doing.
Yes. Absolutely. I would say that you're right, that this is actually a variability. So what customer base you're serving, and their tiering system does a great job of managing that. In terms of like who is what level, and of course the noir is the best level, the top level, and that's where, as you said, the big rollers come in, and they have to be. Things have to be done there that are really very personal. You have the host and dealing with them and so on. And so the concept of loyalty there becomes very personal, very, very
I
close.
can imagine.
As a relationship. And so we have to support that with our technology in ways that are not the same as what we would do for mass marketing and things that are larger segments. I wouldn't say mass marketing, larger segments, that are of the population that are lower tiers, right? So very good point, actually. Definitely.
No, can't wait to talk with them. So listen, I suppose what I, tend to hear a lot from the brand side, Emil, is, there are so many platforms out there. It is a very crowded and, dare I say it, confusing place. So, if you were sitting on the brand side, how would you be thinking about evaluating a platform? So if you were sitting opposite to where you are today, this gives you a chance to maybe shine a little bit in terms of how you think about it. But genuinely, most of this audience are brand side, and it's their opportunity to go, well, why would I think about loyalty methods versus any other tech out there? So what's your pitch? What would you say they should be thinking about that you guys can support them with, that you're super proud of?
Right. It's a very, very good question. I think one of the things that we have realized very early on, even starting with Alaska Airlines, is just how many systems participate in a loyalty and customer engagement execution, for any kind of program. And so one of the things that I think really matters is to, again, you're right about the marketplace. It is confusing. There are a lot of very cool looking products that do somewhat different but sometimes overlapping things, right? So it sometimes becomes very difficult, and of course all of them want to be front and center in a brand's world, right? That's natural, right? They want to to be so they will tell you that we do this and that, and so that they expand their use cases as much as they can. And so it becomes very difficult to put together a picture that says, hey, how do we organize all of these tools into a system that works, that actually produces the kind of experiences for our customers that they can benefit from and we can learn from as marketers, right? So that I think is a key challenge for a lot of companies, and it's very noisy in the marketplace. Of course, sales and advertising, and just a lot of things happen that confuse people. So I think what we have done basically from our side, and I think that's how we approach just about any project, is we have a model. We call it the CX machine, the customer experience machine. And essentially that model tries to categorize all the systems that exist in the company, including Reactor CX if they're our client, and where do they fit into the landscape. And so there's a channel, there's a bunch of channels like POS and kiosks and front desk and so on, and call center and IVRs. And then there's operational systems like our platform, but there's also tools like customer service tools and other things like that are operational. Then there's a data layer that does purging and archiving and enrichment and so on. And then there's the BI layer, which these days is probably the most important layer for modeling and reporting and so on. And so those layers of this picture, and you can see it on our website, we have that model actually published there. This is what we use to actually understand anyone's landscape. I walk into a company, I want to basically, it's almost like putting together an outfit, for somebody. And you say, you know what? Let's see what you have in your wardrobe, and how does that fit on your person? Like how would you look if we put all these things together? Would it look terrible, or can we make it flow nicely? And if you don't have something, maybe you go add it, you get another accessory. But the point is that we're trying to take our model, our way of thinking about the landscape, and then translating that to, how would your company use these tools together and integrate them together to deliver a connected, fluid customer experience, but also marketer experience. In other words, the marketer has to be able to make sense of how this machine works and what it offers to them for learning from the customer. Because I think that's really essentially I think this is something that we're very, very big on, is that, just having our platform doesn't make the loyalty program great. What makes a program great is the ability to learn quickly and change it in ways that increase the value for consumers. And that could only be done in production learning from the actual behaviors that you see. So, essentially we see ourselves not so much as just giving you a thing that will make your loyalty program work, as much as also giving you a learning tool that can quickly tell you what kind of program you really need to be putting out there. Right, and how to change your current offerings based on actual production validated learning from your own customers. And that's different for every business,
Totally.
Because let's face it, if I had a tool that could make a better loyalty program than 7 Rewards, for example, automatically somehow, then I'd be a competitor for for 7-Eleven or something. It's hard to know what matters unless you actually test it with customers and see what they think and how they behave. So, absolutely.
And that's really useful. But even I also wanted to go back to something that you said last time we met as well, Emil, which is, I think a lot of program managers, when they do re-platform, they often see it as the opportunity perhaps to also launch a new proposition. And trying to do both things at one time can probably, stress everybody out. So I think your advice seems to be, let's get the de-risked, platform proposition up and running, and then evolved new propositions to get those enhanced returns once the existing program is absolutely optimized. Have I captured that correctly, from when we talked before?
Absolutely, yes. So that's a core concept that, especially when there's an existing loyalty program, it's not new. If it's new, then there's no replacement. But most of the things we do are replatforming, replacing, enhancing, right? And so I think it's very crucially important that you before you start, running huge improvements on the program, that the program be transformed from its existing infrastructure and technology and platforms into its new platform, right? And so I think that is key to begin with, because it also enables comparability, right? Our whole methodology relies on first, do no harm. Take the existing piece that is running in production and do something with the new platform that mimics that enough that we are confident we haven't broken anything, right? And that it's operating the same way, but now on a much better tool set, right? That immediately allows you, as soon as you make the switch, then you can make rapid improvements and customer-centric innovations that you want to do.
Amazing.
At that point. And I think it's what's interesting is that I'm glad you brought this up, because a lot of people, they're of course impatient. Getting a new platform, why are we doing the same thing?
Yeah.
That's, I think, the first question
Yeah.
we get asked. And I also always have to explain the same thing over and over, is that, okay,
Yeah.
if you have a person that's got a weak heart and you're going to do a heart transplant because they're walking only and you want them to run and sprint,
Yeah.
right? You first have to focus on getting them walking with the new heart, and then they start running, right? So there's a lot of complexity and risk and to mitigate in just doing that.
Yeah.
And so I think our way of thinking about this is that,
Yeah.
once the new platform is in,
Yeah.
you can accelerate very quickly, and that's happened to all of our customers. They can attest to that.
Yeah.
You can start doing things that were previously impossible, very quickly within weeks after launching, right? So
Yeah.
so it really pays to sort of be patient and say, okay, let's get it off the old
Yeah.
infrastructure and let's put on the new,
Yeah.
and then we can go crazy on it. So
Amazing. I love the analogy of the new heart. So you're absolutely right. Let's get walking with the new heart and then we'll try running. So makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're disconnecting a lot of things. The heart has a lot of a lot of things you have to reconnect after you disconnect, right, the old one. So the same thing is with these systems. Loyalty talks to so many things, all these channels, and you have to disconnect it and sort of reconnect it back. And so that in itself is a pretty
it's a
challenging
huge
thing to do. Right?
It's huge.
It's
Absolutely.
yeah.
The final thing you told me, which again, as a non-techie person, coming from a business perspective, what it did resonate with me was this idea that there are levels of ability, I guess, even on the client side always, where your platform needs to be available for a junior campaign manager to immediately switch on a new promotion, but also you might have something super complicated that you do want a developer to be able to kind of plug in, customize something. So just, I suppose, that scale of, I don't know whether agility or sophistication, maybe perhaps is a good word, but I like the fact that you want to cater for the actual user's ability rather than a standard interface where everybody's either overwhelmed or underwhelmed. That you do seem to cater for what the actual needs of the individual users might be, at different stages in the program. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's a very good point. So I think you put it exactly right. Is that a lot of times there I mean, there are campaigns and there are promotions and things that run all the time, and they change, but they change very slightly. You just change the percentages or whatever it is that the reward a little bit, but it's frankly the same promotion, right? You're saying buy 3 things of this kind and in a month and get a bonus, and you're just varying the bonus or the things, but you're not really varying the type of promotion, right? So those are run of the mill, and people like 7-Eleven, they roll them out by the hundreds, every 6 weeks or so. There's a marketing period, so you need volume there, and you need people that do not need to be super users or highly skilled to produce these kinds of marketing periods that launch every 6 weeks. And so for those people, you want something that is easy and just copy and paste kind of thing, and it's fairly risk-free, and does not require any kind of significant technological experience, right, to do that. But then at the same time, you want to also innovate and not just repeat the same promotion types all over and over again, because customers are always interested in new types of engagements. And so then there's the need to be able to have customizations, as you mentioned, to the point where our platform is fully programmable. In fact, you can go really deep and do a lot of things. To the point where you're basically building your own plugins for it, and sort of building a system that sort of adds your own functionality to the platform in the form of these plugins and functions and so on. So again, this is technology speak, and again, nobody really says that you have to do that for everything. And I think the other thing that platform is able to do is, once you do these sort of highly technical tasks, there's ways to package it and templatize it so that then they can be used the same way that the existing simpler promotions were used, right? So that's the whole idea, is to say, hey, we let your users work with the simple ones and without having to have a lot of technology experience. But we also open the door for you to go and do something really interesting, and then package it for your end users that are not as technology savvy, that they can use it. And so I think that's the balance we're always trying to strike, to make that that trade-off, that it's not a black box that has 3 switches on it, that you can only switch these 3 things.
Yeah.
And it's not a programming language that you have to learn just to do even the basic stuff. Right? So it's in the middle. It's like where you're trying to balance it.
Yeah.
And say, some things are easy, a few clicks away. Some things are not so easy, but they're possible.
Yeah.
Right?
Amazing. Amazing. Yeah. Wow. There's so much coming through, Emil. It's certainly a very exciting time for you. Want to congratulate you, all your recent wins. I know BP was another recent one. We've talked about
absolutely.
MGM Resorts, so an incredible client portfolio. I guess, my final question, if you were to think about what you're most proud of in the, I guess, relatively short life of Loyalty Methods, what would you point to? What is it that you're particularly proud that you guys have achieved?
Yeah, I think, and we talk about Loyalty Methods. We've been around for 15 years, but the platform itself, more about 6, I would say, right? So the last 6 years have been prominent. But you're right about that part.
Yeah.
If I had to be honest, I think the most, the thing that I'm proud the most is that we are actually able to not just bring a platform to the place where we're trying to work to the company that we're trying to work with, but actually build, bring a methodology for implementation, and we call it ThreadSync, and it's something that most people underappreciate when they're looking at platforms. They're just looking at features and how the UI looks and how easy it is to use and all that, which are all important things.
Yeah.
But the real thing that is very, very difficult, which that's our differentiator essentially, is that we can walk into a very large organization that is very complicated, and people are very busy doing their daily jobs,
of course,
and put in a change that impacts almost all of their systems, right, including back-end, finance, and everything, liability. And we're able to do that with our process in a way that does not enormously disrupt their lives, right? Because it's a very big change. So how do we compartmentalize it in a way that produces that change without creating a lot of risk, first of all, or any risk at all, for that matter, and doing it at a scale, and doing it across all of these different departments and systems that have to be impacted, and coming out with a success story that is beyond just RCX is now in there. It's actually fully integrated with all the other systems. So I think that methodology, I think, is something that I'm proud of, and I think it goes well beyond of just being a SaaS provider. I think we are able to help customers actually succeed versus just acquire a platform, and there's a difference.
There is a difference, absolutely. And again, you said last time, Emil, it takes a village, and you're absolutely right. I think we all know that as loyalty practitioners. It can look easy on the outside. It's certainly not easy on the inside. So thank you for sharing the story. I don't have any other questions for you today, Emil. Is there anything else that you wanted to mention before we wrap up?
I think we've covered most of the interesting aspects of our business and what we do. I think we're again, the key thing that I think we generally want to, when people think of Loyalty Methods, we want them to think that things get done quickly and it's not risky, and essentially they can be done at scale, and that we understand the large clients that we work with has given us the understanding of what it really takes to do that. That's, I think, the key thing is we're experts in large enterprise implementations, and I think that's our biggest strength.
I think so too. I'm hearing it coming through, Emil. Immense proud, and again, congratulations. We'll of course make sure to link to both you and loyaltymethods.com in our show notes. And of course, if anybody's listening and wants to be connected with you, they can reach out to me or reach out directly to you. So listen, I hope we can stay in touch, Emil. I feel like you guys are just starting now to come on the radar. As we said, no longer a well-kept secret. So from my side, I'm delighted to be working with you. Emil Sarkissian, CEO of Loyalty Methods. Thank you so much from Let's Talk Loyalty and Loyalty TV.
Thank you very much, Paula. Really great. Thank you so much.